Hello, and thank you for joining me. After a couple requests, we are taking a look at a recipe that I put on the menu at my previous job. We had a few nicknames for it, usually either going by chicken brick or chicken lasagna. The inspiration comes from the classic French dish Poulet Presse, not to be confused with the duck press or Poulet Presse. This is a method of cooking boned out chicken, usually including a mousse, and then putting a weight over it to compact it. The end result can be used in both hot and cold applications. Today we are going the hot route. And make sure to stay tuned after the recipe to hear a joke from the very comedically talented Amal. It should be noted that I got inspired to do this dish from watching Canadian chef Ron McKinley share his process for making it on social media. He showed a general overview and I said, hey, well, maybe I can figure this out. I rewatched his videos a few times, cross-referenced some other recipes, and eventually came up with something. I really appreciate that Chef McKinley embraces the philosophy of sharing culinary insight in the name of preserving knowledge and techniques, and I made this video with that same spirit in mind. So let's get into it. First, let's start with an overview of the whole process. For this version of the dish, we are layering chicken thighs into a gastro or hotel pan with a chicken mousse filling in the middle. This chicken mass is then cooked, cooled, pressed with weight, and then portioned and finally heated and crisped up to golden brown on the pickup. Now let's go into each step. Also, if you're following along from Spitzahus, you will notice that I'm making a half recipe and a half gastro, so don't be alarmed that my numbers are not the same as for the recipe in the binder. So get yourself a cutting board, and we are using bone out, skin on chicken thighs, and even though most of the work has already been done for us, we need to go through each of these quickly for some trimming. The folks at the processing plant are only human after all, and they're going through a lot of chicken daily, so there is the occasional bone fragment or bit of cartilage that needs to be cut away. And yes, I know that we all love that oyster, but for this process, the less loose bits we have, the better, so I go ahead and cut that off, but don't worry, it won't be wasted. And with that in mind, the size of these thighs in these packages varies pretty widely, so I also like to level them out by cutting away some of the meat. This will just make everything more uniform when layering. Obviously, you will cut more away from the bigger pieces than the smaller ones. Some might already be flat enough. And again, don't be worried, this trim won't be wasted. I also like to cut off any stringy bits of skin, and having a little buffer of skin is helpful when layering, but you only need a little slack, so I will also trim off excess amounts of that. And I usually determine this by just making sure the muscle is laying center in the skin, and then I make the cut. This is a lot of words, but ultimately it's pretty simple once you get into the rhythm. Right, so now we have all our thighs trimmed up nicely and have them laying skin side down in a tray. And I have two separate trim boxes, one with just pure meat that we will use to make the mousse, and another with skin bits and little bone fragments that we can't use. But before we get to the mousse, we need to cure or dry brine our chicken thighs. I have a mixture here of salt and black pepper with just a little bit of sugar in there, and we just season those thighs generously. And don't worry, I make sure to send that salt and pepper container to the dish pit afterwards to avoid cross-contamination. And then we let those thighs sit in the fridge. In a perfect world, you will let those go overnight, but if you are chicken pressed for time and have to make it in the same day, just let them sit for as long as you can manage before finishing the project. Here are some other thighs that were done the day before, and you can see that that pink color of the flesh really pops a little bit more now, and they have a slightly tacky surface, which also makes layering a little easier. But moving on to the mousse. So I'm using the good trim from the thighs, but I won't need all of it, just 550 grams. The rest can be used for family meal, and I botched the shot here a little bit, but this is 170 grams of cream, 40 grams of egg whites, 35 grams of apple cider. Normally it is white wine or port wine, but some of our cooks are Bangladeshi and I wanted to make sure they also got a chance to try this dish. We also have 11 grams of salt, We will also add in some mushrooms after the mousse is blended, and because we are using dry mushrooms, we need to rehydrate them in some tap water for about 15 minutes. I soaked more than I needed for this recipe because we will be making more chicken lasagna soon enough, and these will hold in the fridge. And then it's time to blend. Get your favorite food processor, I know which one I love the most, and then start by getting the chicken in there with the salt, and we let that run for about 10 seconds. I think adding the salt early helps to break down the protein structure. And then I'm not sure how important the order is here, but I normally go in with egg whites first, then the wine or the cider, and then finish with the cream. And I usually stop 3 times when adding the cream and give that top handle of the machine a spin to make sure everything is blending nicely. And this machine is powerful, so don't feel like you have to go too long, and you don't want the friction to warm up around the blade. This looks pretty good here. And so we transfer that mix to a bowl to mix in our last ingredients. This is 100 grams of those rehydrated morel stems, some sliced chives, which Amal was in charge of cutting, so excuse any wacky pieces. I think she was more focused on getting her comedy performance ready. We also have here some diced shallots. And then we just mix that all up nicely. And now our mousse mixture is ready and we can go on to layering. So I have here a half gastro or half hotel, but you can certainly scale it up to a full pan if that makes more sense for the volume you are doing. And what we want to do is line this with the most magical of kitchen products, plastic wrap. And working with plastic wrap always drives me a little crazy because you just kind of have to accept that it's not a perfect operation. Just make sure you have some slack, there are no gaps, and that the wrap is mostly flush with the pan. That looks okay, and now we can start the layering. I'm just taking the thighs and laying them in the pan, skin side down, and I try to get them in there to fit together as nicely as possible. Just try to make sure you have the skin laying completely flat and not curling up into the meat, and look out for any last little bits of cartilage that you may have missed during trimming. But that is basically it. Now, before we add our mousse layer, I just want to hit the thighs with a little sprinkle of powdered beef gelatin. Chef McKinley actually uses a bit of meat glue, but that isn't available here, so I felt this was the next best thing. It just provides a little bit of insurance when it comes to the tightness of everything. And now it's time to add the mousse and spread it out as evenly as possible with a spatula. Once you have that nice and level, we just want to sprinkle the top with a little bit more of that powdered gelatin. And then to finish, we just layer in the rest of our chicken thighs, skin side up this time obviously, unless you trim those thighs really precisely to the point where they are all the exact same size. You just have to accept the fact that things are going to fit together a little imperfectly, but after making this so many times I can tell you that it really all works out in the end. With our top layer complete, I just go through and adjust the skin a little bit here and there to close any gaps. And then I wrap everything up with the plastic wrap film flaps. I'm making sure things are a little snug and pulled together, but just slightly. We aren't making a sausage here. But that's about it. Now, you can cook this right away if you need to, but if you have the time, I find it nice to let it rest in the fridge under something heavy for the night. But this can be skipped. It's most important that the chicken gets pressed overnight after cooking, but do both if time allows. So now, it's time to cook, and we want to set our fancy oven to 60 degrees Celsius at full steam. I had it on combination in the video here, but fixed it after I stopped recording. And we let that go for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and after that your chicken is cooked. You will usually have a bit of water in the pan, so I like to drain that before the chicken goes into the fridge to cool. And now it is time for the overnight press. I get a clean pan, the same size as the one that it was cooked in, lay it over the chicken, and then weigh it down with whatever works best for you. We found that these 10-liter containers of oil or vinegar work nicely. And now, just let it go. The next day, it is time to portion and serve. Don't feel like you have to slam the pan to get it out. Usually you can just lift it out easily with your hands. Now we remove the plastic wrap, and I will peel away any of the gelled juices from the outside of the chicken because they will make things a little more difficult when we go to brown. And then it is up to you on how to portion this. Since this was the main component for our chicken dish, we go pretty big. But if you have other things on the plate, or if it is part of a larger tasting menu, you could certainly go smaller than this. But now, they are ready for service. See how nice that looks with the mousse layer in the middle and all the bits of mushroom and chive visible? And just for the sake of seeing it all come full circle, I will show you how we would serve it at the restaurant, with cauliflower, puree, jus, and all. I start with a non-stick pan just under medium heat. I add the chicken brick and let it start to render and brown. Once it starts to sizzle and sputter, I give it about a minute on one side, then a minute on the other side. Don't panic if you lose a tiny little piece of chicken. Then I flip it back to the side I started with, add my cauliflower, and then I put the whole pan in the oven set to 200 degrees Celsius, dry heat, and let it go for about 4 to 5 minutes. During that time, I clean up the mess on my stove and enjoy a bit of chai that Joy made for us. Very tasty. And after that time, the pan comes out of the oven and the presentation side should now look beautifully browned, as should our cauliflower. So on the plate, we have a cauliflower puree, which we make a simple circle with, and then the chicken goes down in the middle. The florets are placed around the chicken, and then we sauce with a nice simple chicken jus and garnish with a bit of watercress. Fairly simple plating, but this is a high volume Nordic bistro, so you have to keep things pretty easy. But there you have it, from start to finish. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this look at the way I approach doing something slightly elevated for a higher volume application. This is by no means a definitive way to do this dish. There are so many parts of this process that you could do differently. You could be really OCD about trimming the thighs so that they fit in the pan perfectly. You could change up the mousse recipe and use different alcohols. You could fold different ingredients into the mousse to match the season or to fit your taste better. You could portion and plate it completely differently. Take the technique and run with it. I'm sure you will come up with something tasty. And if you like this video, you can show me by hitting the like button. And please subscribe. We are so close to 1,000 now, I can almost taste it. You can also click the bell icon, which helps keep you updated on new videos. Some people are subscribed but then miss when new videos come out, so you might find this feature helpful. And of course, feel free to drop a line in the comments section and tell me what you think of the recipe and method, or ask any follow-up questions. Until next time, cheers. And now, as promised, a joke from Amal in the 700s Comedy Club.
What do you call a well-balanced horse? No? Stable.
Keep on moving.